I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history. I'm Madison.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the most haunted city on earth. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the most haunted city on earth. My name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Susi.
And today we are wearing hats.
Hats.
You might be wondering why we're wearing hats. Yes, or as Chris likes to say, hat cats.
The hat cat.
Yes.
Hat cat is a cryptid that I've just invented. It's basically a cat that disguises itself as a hat. You put it on your head, and then over time, it slowly eats your brains.
Fun, isn't it? Now, the hats that we are wearing were very graciously sent to us by Gorin Bros, and they are a very high-end hat company. They are coming out with a cryptids line. Ooh.
Yes. Ooh, cryptids.
So, yes, if you're a cryptid lover like us, you could have a hat of this sort. I have.
Displaying wonderful cryptids.
Yes, like the Chupacabra.
Chupacabra.
Or the Loch Ness Monster. And there's an
Nessie.
And there's an assortment of other cryptids that they have in this line, but if you like them, you know where to find them.
They're highly fashionable and informative. Well, not that informative. They just have the name.
But you know.
And an image.
Exactly. But
and
it's a conversation starter. Yeah,
it's interesting because this is the more goblin-y looking Chupacabra versus the more, dog-like Chupacabra.
Yes. I like it though. I'm into it.
Yeah, I know. When I first heard of the Chupacabra, it was a goblin. It was like a little goblin monster, but over time it has been more identified with like a species of dog of some type.
Yes.
For sure.
Long-snouted.
The Sholo.
Yes. It is evolved into our dog Tartan.
Oh, yes, there you go.
So,
you got one.
Yes. So there you go. But before we get into our episode about cryptids, we did our Savannah regional type of cryptids in the last episode, but this time we're going to be talking about all of the more famous cryptids.
International cryptids, if you will.
There you go. So, but before we get into that, JT, you have some announcements for us?
Yeah, I just want to thank our newest pair junkies, Gwen Staggs, Mariana Z, Nicole Kingbird, Veronica Ramirez, Carla Guerrero, Jessica Teresa, Caitlin Chamberlain, Heavy Impact Gaming, Raven Masters, Arcadia Eklund, and Lindsay Williams. Thank y'all so much for your support. Seriously, we really, 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 really appreciate it. And be looking out for some really, really cool stuff coming out actually this week.
Yes.
So that's exciting. On top of that, we have our website and merch dropping on Halloween.
Merch.
And we're actually wearing merch.
Wearing some of the merch.
Yes.
I have been pimped out.
Yes. We have been
for sure.
swagged, if you will.
What?
Yes, and if you can't see us because you're just listening to the podcast.
Yeah. I guess me pointing to my shirt. Pointless to the podcasters.
But that's fine. Yes, we have fun shirts. They're Bella Canvas shirts. They're very soft and comfy.
High quality.
Yes, and they say various things. Like JT says, the most haunted city on earth. And Chris's also says, the most haunted city on earth. And mine says, stay spooky, y'all. With the little ghosties. So if you would also like to wear little ghosties on your chest, you can buy these shirts.
And we got some good stuff. It's not just shirts. It's sweaters. We have sweatpants with ghosts on the butt.
Yeah,
booty.
bootyful.
Booty ghosts.
Booty.
Hashtag booty ghosts.
That one's going to stick.
That's going to stick for a while.
Yep. And we're going to have also a hashtag ghost heroin for pair junkies only.
Ooh, yes.
Oh, yeah. I don't even think I told y'all about that.
No,
Yes.
that's news to us, but
Yes.
I'll be wearing it.
Yes, absolutely.
That's the way to go.
And
cool.
fanny packs and all sorts of stuff. So
Anything you can slap a logo on, we'll slap a logo on.
For sure. And all pair junkies will get various discounts.
There you go.
So if you are not a parajunkie, you should definitely consider becoming one.
Join the family.
Yes.
Join us.
Come join our nonsense that we
Yes.
do on Patreon. But anyways, is that
all right? Yeah, that's it. Let's talk about cryptids.
All right.
Okay.
So, which cryptid would you like to start with?
So, when you start to like spread out and talk about cryptids, you kind of realize that there are just like popular cryptids that have kind of risen to the top of people's awareness. So I'm going to go with a more obscure but well-known cryptid, and that is the Mongolian death worm.
Oh yes,
Oh,
I love
boy.
that.
Who doesn't love the Mongolian death worm? It sounds like
SpongeBob
a
hates it.
That's the that's the Alaskan bullworm, but close enough. Honestly,
yeah, actually,
it
That's
might
what
be,
they're going
that's
for.
Yeah.
what they're going for. And yeah, you know, it sounds like a heavy metal band.
Yeah.
We are Mongolian death worm. Yeah, exactly. The Mongolian death worm, also known as the intestine worm, I believe they say, because that is kind of what it resembles, a cow's intestine.
Oh.
And then if you come into contact with it, you will die. And this is a well believed tribal beware situation throughout Mongolia. This idea that if you came across this thing that just looked like writhing intestines in the sand, you stay away from it because it can and will cause you grievous harm. And I believe in certain instances they say it spits out like a liquid that gets on you and
acid.
I don't even know if it's acid. It's just like an incredibly dangerous substance that will
This
kill you.
had to have influenced Tremors.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
No. As a matter of fact, if
No-brainer.
you see images of the Mongolian death worm, they look very much like Tremors with their mouths closed.
Oh.
A graboid.
A graboid.
Graboid.
A graboid. And it's interesting because I think that's a long time creature of some repute, like in fables, and even the concept of a dragon. In certain areas, they called them worms, and they called them, from the word verum, dragons were just large serpents, which were just large worms. And so, and I learned that from the wonderful movie Lair of the White Worm. Which
There's a movie called Lair of the White Worm.
it is great. If you have not seen Lair of the White Worm, get out and watch it because it is a trippy, bizarre. It stars a young Peter Capaldi, who was recently Doctor Who, but when he was young and beautiful, and a young Hugh Grant, who is still beautiful. But he was super beautiful then. It was like, oh no, who's this guy? But if you had a chance, Lair of the White Worm, and it kind of talks about the fact that the concept of the giant serpentine creature is prevalent throughout the world. And even now, giant snakes, I've encountered anacondas that were at least 20 feet long, if not longer. Oh, yeah. And in the wild. And you're like, oh, that's not good. This kind of creature, unchecked, a predator, an alpha predator that can just grow to its environment. So yeah, I think that there was a time when these types of creatures were much more prevalent and seen more regularly. They were probably hunted to extinction.
Yeah.
Because who's going to let that live near you?
Absolutely.
You see it and you're like, we got to.
It's like they haven't evolved yet, or they're too far evolved.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Sure,
It's
I
like,
understand.
that's what a cryptid is, right?
Right. Well, it's just something that escaped our observation.
Sure.
Because a lot of the creatures make sense when you start to pare them down into like what kinds of stories do you hear about them, and then what kinds of creatures actually exist that could mirror them.
Sure.
And you find, I remember hearing a tale about a crusader coming back from the Crusades and encountering a dragon and fighting it, and realizing that if you were a knight from Europe and you were traveling back from the Middle East and you encountered a crocodile, a big, ferocious crocodile, you would probably classify that as a dragon.
Yeah.
Crocodiles are basically dinosaurs. I mean, when you look at
They
one,
look like
just
it.
because we understand what it is, doesn't make them less ferociously large and scary and scaly and covered in teeth and, armor-like skin. And so, like, when you take all those things into consideration, you're like, I wonder if some of those accounts weren't just people encountering animals that we accept
That's
regularly.
what I
Yes.
was thinking.
And then, the definition changed because, a guy comes back. He's like, let me tell you about this creature. It was twice as long as my horse.
Yeah.
It was, covered in scales. It had big sharp teeth. Like, you're talking about a dragon. He's like, I guess I am.
Yeah.
You're right. And
Yeah.
they're like, well, here's a sainthood. Nice going,
Yes,
George.
right.
we live in a world of cryptids.
Yeah,
Well,
we live in
yeah.
a world of cryptids.
But that doesn't negate some of the cryptids leaning towards more like the folklore side of
Oh, sure,
things, where
absolutely.
they are omens of sorts, or
Well,
they.
Yeah. I think folklore is an excellent example of how people took things that they saw but didn't understand and then translated them into, something amazing.
Yeah, because that's how Mothman kind of is evolved into. Because in theory, Mothman could have been some ferocious bird creature of sorts. Because, have you seen some of the owls and hawks that exist in
sure.
the world? They're horrifying. And
An
so-
out of control barn owl can look like a giant, squatting individual.
exactly. And so it's like, think about it. Excuse, ma'am.
Oh my. Siri?
She's like, you need to stop talking. That was my NSA agent saying, you need to stop talking about these things. Anyways. But yeah. So think about, Mothman and stuff. He could have been some big bird creature, but he's now become kind of in line with the Banshee kind of lore.
Oh yeah, he's
of
become
death
prophetic.
omens. Yeah.
Right.
So maybe some of those creatures could have been creatures of, scientific reasoning, but you never know.
Yeah, some anomaly, some strange thing, because you're also talking like thunderbirds.
Oh yeah.
A thunderbird is a gigantic bird, and if you were to encounter a bird that was of unnatural proportions to you, if a bird had a 12-foot wingspan and was standing nearly as tall as a human being, if you saw that in the middle of the night and you weren't really getting a good look at it, you would have, reason to say I was a giant man-like, winged-like man wing thing.
Yes.
For sure.
Well, before we started filming, you had looked up the hammerhead bat.
Yes. I was saying that whenever I see a picture of the hammerhead bat, and we'll put up a picture for people on YouTube, but if you're when you're able, not while you're driving, look up hammerhead bat. The hammerhead bat looks like most of the illustrations I've ever seen of the Jersey Devil. Huh. When you look at the Jersey Devil, actually, JT did not get the full effect of the hammerhead bat story.
No, I definitely
So I'm
didn't.
going to show him a picture of a hammerhead bat. So this is a hammerhead bat.
Oh yeah, I've seen those. They're so
They're
Weird.
bizarre.
Weirdly cute.
They're,
Yes.
they're a strange animal, but when you really think about pictures you've seen of the Jersey Devil, the hammerhead bat and the Jersey Devil do share a very similar. Let me see if I can pull up a picture. Of this.
Are you saying most cryptids are? Oh gracious, that does look like a hammerhead bat.
Yeah.
Like,
Right?
for sure.
So we'll try to put up a comparison picture of the Jersey Devil and a hammerhead bat. But yeah, it's fascinating because the hammerhead bat is, I don't think it's indigenous to this area. So if you saw it, it would be really weird to see. And if it was a giant one, it would be really weird to see. But the Jersey Devil, of course, comes with a very elaborate story of a witch and the devil mating and the birth of the Jersey Devil as the offspring of Mother Leeds.
Yes, that sounds about right.
Mother Leeds was the name of the witch, and she, had a contract with the devil. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and and issued forth the demon, the Jersey Devil, and the Jersey Devil is such a popular cryptid, truly a capitalized upon cryptid. There's a sports team named the Jersey Devil. So, is it a hockey team?
Maybe.
I don't know.
I'm not a
We're
sports
not sporty
person.
people.
I'll look it up. I'll look it up.
But that's an excellent example. Again, is there is something in nature that kind of looks like what people describe, and you're like, I wonder if that's somehow
Yeah, it's
part
hockey.
of it.
There you go.
New Jersey Devils.
There you go.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's wild. That's like West Virginia having the Mothman statue.
They should have a Mothman team in West Virginia, but
no, the statue.
Oh well, yeah.
Yeah.
But they honor him.
Everyone wants to go there.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you and I want to go there because we want to take
Pleasant?
photos.
Yeah, Point Pleasant.
Point Pleasant.
And for those of you who are not familiar with that specific Mothman story, which seems like the establishing Mothman
Absolutely.
story, was
Thanks
that,
to Richard Gere.
thanks to the Mothman prophecies.
Yes.
Was that townsfolk in Point Pleasant were having these encounters with this very strange thing, this large owl-like, red-eyed flying man. And it was causing all kinds of disruptions to their daily lives, and it culminated in him appearing on a bridge that ultimately collapsed. The bridge collapsed.
Yeah.
During like peak hours of traffic, and it was such a calamitous thing that most people thought that the Mothman was there to warn people
For sure.
of this impending catastrophe. And,
Yeah.
and since then, there have been lots of stories that seem to suggest that the Mothman had appeared before other things as well.
Oh yeah, there's a couple stories where he had shown up, and I believe it was Japan. Am I right about that? Maybe it
was Ukraine.
Ukraine.
Before the explosion.
At Chernobyl.
Chernobyl.
Yes, that's what it was.
Right,
There
right,
was reports of Mothman-like creatures at Chernobyl. So that's why he leans towards the Banshee side of lore, which I know some of you people will come at me because they'll say that's not how Banshees work. But
when you pare it down to its absolute, essence, a Banshee appears prior to calamitous death. That is a function of the Banshee lore. The Banshee just doesn't show up on a lark. If you hear the Banshee cry, you're going to die. It has to rhyme, right?
absolutely.
And it's interesting because I want to say that recently, in the last 5 years, there has been a rash of Mothman sightings in Chicago.
Yeah, I
Around
remember
high.
reading
Yes,
that.
yes.
Remember reading that, babe?
Yeah,
That people
on the
have
tall
seen.
buildings, and,
Sure.
and people were thinking that it was a person doing the flying squirrel suit, those little glider
Yeah.
suits. But there have been reports,
Sure.
more and more, and it's like, oh, I wonder if something bad is going to happen in Chicago. And then, of course,
I think it's just their crime rate.
I was going to say their general violence of
Their
Chicago
general
is so
violence.
high that you might be
seeing it,
dealing
yes.
with something that deals with prophetic, death is coming. And in Chicago, you're not wrong. Death is
Yeah.
coming.
Yeah.
It is an out of control issue.
Yes. But Mothman is just a fascinating story in general, though. And I think West Virginia has done a good job immortalizing Mothman.
Yeah, it's like that one main thing they got.
I mean, I
They
just
have beautiful mountains.
They have
Thank you
beautiful
very
do.
much.
mountains, but everyone knows that. Yeah,
Yes.
like that. But the thing that like there are other states with beautiful mountains though. No other state has a Mothman.
I love that they leave pepperoni rolls and Mountain Dew at Mothman statue every West Virginia day. I love that. And those pepperoni
That's
rolls
so
are great.
awesome.
If I was a deity or if I was a cryptid of some sort and someone was going to leave me an offering,
Honoring you with pepperoni rolls.
that would be
Yeah,
amazing,
absolutely. Well, and in Appalachia, they have the look behind, right?
Yes, they do.
And that's throughout. But in West Virginia, up in the mountains, that
hollers.
is a pretty common. Don't go out in the woods. If something whistles, if something calls your name, do not respond. Do not go out there. Do not leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like if you think about West Virginia and what they got Mothman, and the second thing they got is Wrong Turn / Deliverance. And I'm here to tell everybody, Deliverance is North Georgia.
It is in North Georgia.
No one said it. Everyone, it's like one of the the things that everyone thinks, but it's wrong.
Mandela effect.
Mandela
Yes.
effect.
Yeah.
That everyone thinks Deliverance is
No, it takes place in
in
Georgia.
West Virginia.
Yeah.
It is North Georgia.
Yeah.
Like that's
Yeah.
that's the craziest thing that everyone thinks that. But that's the second thing they got.
Yeah.
It's like when you think of West Virginia.
That's not a great thing to
unfortunately-
have.
No, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm
For
saying.
any West Virginians out there, we're not casting shade on West Virginia.
No,
It's a-
well, I'm actually
it's a
trying
beautiful
to-
state.
Yes.
We just went there and it was fantastic. Everyone was so nice. And like I was like, why do more people not come here? Why do people only, another thing is we even read about the incest thing with West Virginia not being true. It was because of a president, right?
Yes.
It was a president who said, I'm trying to remember the president that did it, but the president came, I don't know if it was Nixon or not, but the president came and made an incest joke. And that's why West Virginia is made that way. But there's people did studies, like scientists did studies. We read a whole thing about this.
Yes.
Scientists did studies going back and looking at marriage licenses. There's no incest in West Virginia. Like, I'm sorry for all the people that think it's funny. There's just no incest in West Virginia.
There you go. But there is Mothman, and that's what
But there
matters.
is Mothman.
And that's what matters. But
Absolutely.
going back to some cryptids, let's think. What I would say, let's talk about the chupacabra, just because Chris is wearing it.
I am wearing the hat.
Chupa.
I love that story just because I think it's interesting that we still can't figure out what exactly it is. And the odd thing about it, everything else about a chupacabra leads to believe that it's just an animal-like creature. But what animal sucks blood out of its...
Right, exactly. That's the whole thing, is the goat sucker.
Yeah.
And it raises a lot of interesting questions, because it's in a lot of chupacabra cases, they'll find only one injury, not like a fang marks,
But,
not like
yeah.
Dracula, but like an actual, singular hole, almost like a shunt.
That's also
so you used to see, like in the evolution of the presentation of the chupacabra, because like I said, the first time I ever saw a chupacabra, it looked like a ghoulie. It looked like a little a gremlin goblin thing.
Yeah.
And its tongue was like a straw. It was like, open at the end. So the thought was that it struck you with the tongue and sucked out the blood.
Sure.
But yeah, it's just a peculiar series of things, and could be completely unrelated.
Yeah.
The sighting of these animals that they're not sure what it is, and the animals that are losing blood could be two separate things.
Yeah, I wonder if the vampire bat has anything to do with it.
Well, vampire bats, usually when you see that they have drank any blood from anything, you get like little fang marks, like little tiny fangs, because their
Yeah.
mouths are only so big. They're
and
not.
they're so tiny.
Yeah.
They're in that region, right?
They're so tiny, in
Yes,
fact, and people
but-
don't realize that a vampire bat, as it's drinking, is urinating because it doesn't have enough space in its body.
Oh boy!
So it's just like a straight
Yeah.
through system. It's like, this is forcing urine out of my body because I'm so tiny.
Yes.
Oh wow!
So yeah, emptying an entire animal of its blood, because that falls into like cattle mutilation and things of that nature, because it's such a peculiar effect.
Sure.
To come across an animal and there not be blood.
Yeah. Could it be? If it's not like some evolved vampire bat, could it be a person? Like, could it be like The Descent? In the movie The Descent, how those are like the creatures are actually like the cave divers down there, and they've just evolved to be. I love that concept.
I know you
but,
do.
Yeah, I know you. You know I do. It's like one of my favorite movies. But
Well, isn't there? Because is it the Bean family?
the Bean family.
So if you're familiar with The Hills Have Eyes, which is about these mutants that live in the hills, it's actually based on a true story of an incestuous group of people that lived in caves, and they kind of evolved to live in the dark, and they kind of and they were just wild people,
Sure.
And cannibals. So it does raise that question, like, could it be some form of humor interaction? But if it was human interaction, the more likely thing would be that they're extracting blood for ritualistic purposes.
Oh yeah.
Because of the way it happens. You don't just show up and drain an animal sitting there.
Yeah,
It's true.
It's. Oh, what were you gonna say?
Oh,
Maddie?
yeah. I was going to say, it is possible that it could be, a group of people. Because, there are people that live out in the national parks.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
there's like wild people that, you know, that's part of the
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, that just hit me. That's almost like a cryptid.
it is in a
Well,
way.
the
wild
you know?
people- Do you know
Could
what-
be a
you know what
big-
we're talking
Bigfoot
about?
sightings. Yeah,
True.
absolutely.
You know what we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely.
Those people.
Anywhere you're going to find large tracts of wilderness, you're going to find people who for one reason or another disconnected from society and started living a life in the wild.
Yeah.
And not to be, you know, overly dramatic with, you know, wild people, but it's true. They don't have any reason to communicate with any other forms. They don't need words. They don't need to. So, you know, if you've got generations of people who do not need to speak to one another in any sophisticated pattern, you will have a very insular, you know, society that does not adhere to any law, that does not adhere to any moral structure that you would want to put on them, because they live their lives the way animals do. And we've talked about this before. You know, when an animal attacks, when an animal does something, we attribute it to nature.
Yeah.
We do not say, well, that's evil. You know, well, I guess in certain instances we do, but for the most part, we recognize an animal's behavior as natural. And so when you're dealing with people who have foregone society, who have foregone, you know, living, you know, as we do, and they do something that seems brutal or somehow inhuman or inhumane, we think to ascribe it as evil, but when they're in fact just living the lives that they live.
Sure.
Yeah.
The wild people, like I remember we read this story like a year ago, Madison, about that. It was like the wild man that killed the boy, that took the boy into the forest, and took him away from his family, and they found his like body or something.
Yeah, there's plenty of stories of that where you know, people encounter these other people who seem feral in a sense, where they're usually completely naked because obviously they don't need clothes and like things of that nature. And there's plenty of reports of people disappearing in national forests.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times that gets attributed to those people who are living out in the forest, you know?
Yeah.
Why those people are attacking, you know, just random hikers is completely kind of unknown, really.
But you got to figure that there has to be a sense of territorialism.
Yeah.
There has to be a sense of, you know, hunting, foraging, those kinds of things. And as shocking and alarming as it would be to come across a wild person, that wild person coming across, you know, a quote unquote civilized human being must be equally alarming and strange.
Absolutely.
You know, and so it comes down to this strange sort of, I would almost call them cryptids because they are not well documented. They do sort of still live in lore in a lot of ways, because even when we attribute it to it, we tend to think of it as like this one-off situation or this one in a million situation where there could be communities, there could be some insular group of these people living a life that we can't comprehend or understand, and therefore we call it wild and and attribute them to monstrous proportions and monstrous ideologies.
For sure.
Yeah. And that's why a lot of the lore in Appalachia kind of leads to, if you hear something you didn't, or like if you saw something you didn't, or you don't go out once your porch lights turn on, you know, things like that. A lot of it comes from people who lived out in these very wilderness dense areas, you know, and a lot of those people who still live out in those communities, they're the ones who believe it the most, because they, a lot of them have seen these type of people, or they've known somebody who was attacked by somebody who, you know, is off the grid essentially. And
which makes the concept of luring you out, you know, making whistling sounds, making calls and cries and calling you by name, which is probably the most alarming thing, is to be like standing outside somewhere and just hear your name come out of the woods.
That's pretty terrifying.
Yeah.
What
I
is
can't
the
think of
look
a
back?
single supernatural instance where that's a good thing.
No.
You know,
Yeah.
it's like,
the look back is basically just something that makes you look back.
Right.
So like you hear,
How does it work?
you hear your,
you hear your name, you turn around, and they also say you oftentimes will see it like slip behind a tree. So it's also called a look behind. So it's like you just see the edge of it slipping behind a tree. But the concept being, if you pause, if you stop, if you turn, you give it the opportunity to attack. Because that's what it's really doing. It's trying to slow you down. It's trying to bring you closer. So, and I've seen scary interpretations of this being, this creature. It's like a shadowy thing that follows you around. And it inhabits the Appalachian wilderness. And I want to say that most people who live along the wilderness know the rules.
Yes.
Don't turn around.
Yes.
Don't go towards it. If you heard your name, you didn't.
Yeah.
Those things you hear often enough when you talk to people of the region. And I'm fascinated too, because in my experience, most people that live in the Appalachians don't mess around with it. Yes. They're like, no hunting. No exploration, no looking into it. They're not setting up, cameras, and they're not trying to catch it. They're like, leave it be, leave it alone. And that to me is a very clear indication that whatever's happening is real enough to them for them to set parameters, to set guidelines. Like, no, I'm not going to sit out in the woods in the middle of the night. Are you insane? I'm not going to go out there and look for this thing. No. So, and I don't even think I've ever really seen like a ghost hunting show or anything like that, spend any time looking for these things with good reason. Don't do it. If you're out there thinking, well, I live really close to Appalachia, don't.
If you do it, message us.
Yeah.
And find something.
If you survive.
We're not encouraging it though.
I somewhat am.
No.
JT would
this
be.
This is not a unified front here.
Yeah. JT would be the dumbest one, though, to go out into
I'd have cameras like up in the trees.
He would be the one to die first in a horror movie.
I am loving the trap cameras. They put trap cameras out in the woods. So, like, if you go online, you can look up trap cameras, and some of the things they catch in trap cameras are just amazing and eerie, because a lot of times it's like, oh look, these are animals that you would never see.
Trap cameras? You mean like trail cameras?
Yeah, trail cameras. Sorry,
okay.
I call them trap cameras because they go off when
the trap is set. Oh,
when somebody goes across the infrared.
Got
it. So yeah, in my brain it's a trap camera.
Yes.
Understood.
Yeah, it's true. It's funny how many people have actually caught really creepy things on their cameras.
Children. Have you ever seen those?
Yo.
Like out in the middle of the woods, there's just like a child like ambling along in the middle of the wilderness.
Yeah, that's
not right.
That's gonna be a no for me, dog.
Yeah.
Well, the black-eyed children.
Oh.
That's a cryptid.
I don't even know if we would classify that as a cryptid necessarily.
To a degree.
Because even the Mothman is arguable because of the supernatural overtones of it. Mm-hmm. But black-eyed children, and we've talked about this on the podcast before, the black-eyed children are a relatively new addition
80s,
to the pantheon of weird things that you might encounter. And I always I rank cryptids by intelligence, because the black-eyed kids seem to have an intelligence and a manipulative aspect, and they seem to be an interactive thing, which puts them more squarely into supernatural, paranormal than it does necessarily cryptid. Because, and I'm again, without any expertise, I usually call cryptozoology and cryptids creatures that could exist but are misunderstood by classification. So these are things that people have witnessed, seen, maybe turned into folklore, maybe brought upon. Black-eyed kids are just creepy, just weird, and they have a goal. And I've heard of people who actually succumb, who say they let the kids in, or they did this or that, and they almost fall into a category of, I believe we talked about this, fae. Yeah,
that's what I was going to say, is I feel like they're less cryptid, more fae, which I know JT doesn't understand the vast.
I do.
No. When we talked about black-eyed kids, and I was like, they're fae, you don't want to mess with them. Don't mess with fae. JT's like, they're just fairies. They don't do much.
Oh, ouch.
Yeah, and I'm like, nope. It was funny. We got a TikTok question one time, I think recently, saying like, can you do an episode where you explain to JT why fae suck? And I'm like, honey, I've been trying. I have been trying. It is hard.
That's actually so funny.
If you know, you know. But Yeah.
Yeah.
Fae, though, do like align a lot of their rules that they have to adhere to are very similar to things that the black-eyed kids have to adhere to. Like they have to be let in. They,
Sure.
tend to have malicious intent if you break the contract with them, things like that, where they're trying to get something out of you. It's very one-sided, parasitic almost.
Yeah.
And a lot of Fae fall into that same kind of energy.
Yeah, the classic stories of the Fae and the concept too of the Fae in general is that they are in an easier way to explain it, they live in a dimension other than our own. They trespass into our dimension through portals, fairy rings, things of that nature. So their stay in our world is tenuous at best, which is why they have rules, why they have to adhere to them, why they need anchors. Sure. And a lot of times those anchors are foundling children, taking a child, holding, having these things that keep them capable of being a part of this world. And there's a general belief that at one point there was a schism between human and Fae, and it created this separation of the Fae world and the human world, which led to resentment, deep resentment, because the Fae were nature and they were caretakers of nature. And when that schism happened, nature began to be perverted and poisoned and polluted because humans are bad at it. So, there's a lot of great layering of stories to be had, but in those, and this is like the one angle to look at it to make it make more sense, because we tend to think of fairies in that, butterfly winged, gossamer winged little things
Tinkerbell.
Tinkerbell.
that prance about and have, like my first introduction to the idea that fairies were what we thought they were was in the movie Labyrinth, where he was spraying the fairies with insecticide, and she picked one up and it bit her.
Oh yeah,
and she's
yeah.
Ow! And she's like, it bit me. And he's like, well, what did you think a fairy would do?
Yeah.
Yeah, but even think about Tinkerbell. She had an attitude.
She had an attitude.
She was locked in a jar most of the movie.
She tried to murder Wendy.
She did.
The very first act she did when Wendy was coming down from the sky was to tell Toodles to shoot her with an arrow.
Yes.
And
my gosh.
had Wendy not had the kiss that Peter gave her, which is what the arrow struck, Wendy would be dead.
Yes.
Bruh.
Yeah. Well, Tinkerbell was very protective of Peter in that way, because they had in folklore logic, they had a contract between them, and so Tinkerbell was jealous that this other girl was coming in and interfering with that relationship she had with Peter, so she was going to take her out.
One of my favorite descriptions, though, of fairy folk, and this was from Peter Pan, was that a fairy's body is so small that it can only occupy one emotion at the time. So when it was mad, it was all mad.
It was 100% mad.
When
That
it was,
is
when
really
it was,
interesting.
When it was in love, it was all love. So when you're on the good side of a fairy, you're golden. When you're on the bad side of a fairy, you're dead.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they will stop at nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, would a skinwalker be Fae?
That's tricky.
And it is tricky because Fae tends to deal with a type of with a cultural way of describing these extra dimensional things. The skinwalkers exist in a different culture.
Yeah. Okay.
Because if you take in the indigenous peoples, they tended to revere nature with almost as much love, care, and responsibility as you would expect from a Fae culture. And I think that granted them incredible supernatural access. So
Sure.
I think that in the case of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, where the skinwalker sort of derives from, you're now dealing with people who were far more in tune with nature than the common Westerner.
Yeah.
And I think that rings true for most pagans are far more in tune with nature. Most Wiccans, most people who follow any other course than the course of progress.
Yeah.
People who still recognize it. So the main difference is I don't know that you would identify it as fae simply because it's not the culture it's derived in.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
A lot of the
Because a lot of the lore is very similar.
yeah, it is. It's very similar. But with like, you know, when you get into Skinwalker and like Wendigo, like lore and whatnot, it does have way more supernatural abilities than like necessarily, you know, and way more human connection than a fae.
If they're not cryptids, then there's a lot less cryptids than I thought there were.
Yes. That is an excellent point.
Yeah.
There are not many cryptids.
Yeah.
Cryptids are fringe science, meaning we could possibly stumble upon one. Like Bigfoot. Perfect example. Bigfoot is a cryptid because there's enough awareness of his existence, but not enough proof of it.
Gotcha.
You know, and without the proof, he remains something that people could say doesn't exist. So when you start talking about various creatures, and you know, it's like saying a goblin is a cryptid. It's like, well, a goblin's not really a cryptid, but functionally, if you were to see something that acted in nature with some kind of thing
Under a bridge.
Yeah.
Wanting money.
Yeah.
that would be a troll. Thank you
Yes.
very much.
Oh.
Yes.
Duh.
Well, and that's fascinating too, because in is it Norway that they believe in trolls?
Yes. Yes,
Trolls
it is.
and goblins and
yeah,
stuff?
it's all
So,
up in that region.
Yeah, if you're in that Scandinavian region, trolls might be more considered cryptid than not. You know, might be considered more likely to be encountered. There
Yeah,
are
it's
laws.
all about where you are, really.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's why I think, like, you know, the Wendigo and Skinwalker, since I associate those paranormal entities or supernatural entities with specific regions of the world. That's why I think it's a cryptid mainly.
Because you can ascribe it to a place.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
describe it.
absolutely.
That makes sense. And you know, I think it is a pretty broad term, actually, cryptid. I tend to lean towards because there has to come a separation point.
Yeah.
You know, because like when you say the ghosts of Limp Mansion, that's a very specific place. It's in Kansas, Missouri. It's in Missouri,
Okay.
St. Louis, Missouri. So the Limp Mansion, full of ghosts, very well known. They're isolated. They're in that spot. They behave a certain way. They're not cryptids.
No,
they're ghosts.
The ghosties.
Yeah.
But there are like creatures that have more to do with paranormal derivation
Yeah.
than natural evolutionary pattern.
When defining a cryptid, though, like, so with the ghost idea, you know, they stick mainly with like one area. I mean, one like very specific area, a room, you know, an object,
Sure.
a person. But with cryptids like the Wendigo, or entities like the Wendigo and the Skinwalker, they go all over the place in that region, right?
Yeah. Well, and this is a tricky one because even when you get down to it, the terms Wendigo and Skinwalker, while the attributes of things may be similar, it's actually very localized. Skinwalkers are a very specific belief structure, a very specific location, so while we see things and and it's become more common term to say Skinwalker, but the truth of the matter is if it's not like very specifically tied to this very specific group of indigenous peoples, it's not a Skinwalker. Sure. It's just something that exhibits similar things. The Wendigo too.
Yeah.
You know, the Wendigo in certain instances is, you know, just a murderous human that then transported and extended its life unnaturally.
Yeah.
But it is also very tied to a specific belief structure.
Sure.
So things that happen outside of that, it becomes tricky because if we call everything a Skinwalker, then you're kind of ignoring the lineage of the story of what is believed.
I would agree with that because, like, you know, Wendigos, think about it. When we did an episode on Wendigos, it was it's all up in that like Northwoods, Minnesota, Michigan kind of region of even dipping into Canada of people who experience it. But you got to remember where the Wendigo kind of like started was with cannibalistic groups. And it's so they transformed into the Wendigo, and it was like that Wendigo psychosis
Yeah,
of
Wendigo
sorts.
psychosis.
So that leads me to less believe that it's a cryptid of sort, even though the reason why I feel like it gets messy is because we associate animalistic type creatures with being cryptids. These have a different purpose. Whereas, like, you know, a chupacabra could have just been a dog that got a taste for blood or something, or evolved.
A breed, yeah.
That evolved to have like that ability to drink blood, or, you know, it's just evolved to be something abnormal to our beliefs. But with Wendigos, it's like, it's hard to assume that, you know, that would be that a human turned into a creature could be a cryptid.
But
then
you're
blurs
also dealing with the
lines.
concept of curses and the concept of an almost magic, like werewolves and vampires. Werewolves and vampires, lycanthropes and vampires, could conceivably fit on the cryptid scale. However, they are so closely related to curses and to, you know, hyper spiritual situations that you don't see werewolves on most cryptid lists. You won't see a vampire on most cryptid lists. But when you think about it, conceptually, in a vampire case, it might just be some kind of weird animal that when it infects you, you become like it, you know, rabid or something of that nature. Werewolves are the same way. It seems to be a disorder that can fall upon you. But that is humans being affected into something else, not a cryptid, more like a disease or a disorder.
Yeah. I kind of believe that a lot of the, you know, dogman lore, you know, from history probably came from rabies being a thing, because it turns you into something that you're not with brain swelling.
It's one of the scariest things. We're so lucky that humans cannot survive the gestation period of rabies, you know, because the fever is so high, it kills us. Because if we could survive the fever, we would turn into, you know, aggressive, horrifying, you know, it's the rage virus from the 28 Days Later series, those movies. They're zombies, quote unquote, but they're not. They actually have a survivable rabid, you know, they have rabies, and they're able to survive the fever. And once you survive the fever, you're just incensed. You're just insane. You're just, you know, what makes a mad dog is that it's no longer killing for food. It's killing for sheer agitation, for sheer, you know, paranoia. And to think that if you could affect a person with that, what would they be? And to think that in history, there may have been people who could survive, you know, anomalously survive rabies and then come out the other end just mad. Sure. Just crazy.
Yeah. Don't give Putin any ideas.
Oh my God. There is also like the logic of it could have just been a really hairy person that created a werewolf. You know, like, no, seriously, like people, even nowadays, people have like,
hypertrichosis.
Exactly. They have those disorders that creates your hair to rapidly grow and you know, things like that.
Like in the freak shows, the dog face boy and things like that. You know,
Yep.
There have been many instances where people exhibited this, you know, lycanthrope look. You know, it's like it's a person, but he's covered in hair, must be a monster.
Exactly, because it's abnormal to like our normal senses, and especially back in like if you think about like the 15th century up until like the 19th century, people were so confused about what was going on. They're just trying to figure it out and like create societies.
They didn't have science.
And so they're like, so they see a guy covered in hair and they're like, oh, you're crazy. You know,
you're
like,
obviously a werewolf. Let me hit you with
that's interesting.
You know,
that's a really good point, babe. For real.
Well, whenever people were met that were different, we generally killed them.
Yes, that is true.
We that was our go-to. Our go-to move was let's burn them at the stake.
Witchcraft.
Burn them at the stake.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, because that was. It's funny because we were just talking about wild people. Civilization as a whole has not been all that civilized. You know, when something challenged our belief structures or challenged our idea of normality, we answered with violence. We answered by killing them. We answered by, executing them, by trying them, by torture. Humans kind of suck.
Oh, yeah.
We are so full of, if there's one cryptid on this planet that is the most destructive, it's us. It's like, have you seen these things? They show up, they take over everything, they cut all the trees down. It seems so unnatural.
So
they build
true.
weird boxes to live in, and then they, ride around in smoke spewing beasts that roar down the streets at hundreds of miles an hour. We are the most terrifying monsters. If you were to ask some animal, say, what do you think of humans? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Exactly. Unless it's your dog. Then your dog is like,
well,
that's
the dog
the best
is
thing ever.
is a traitor to the rest of the animals. It's like, I'm going to make friends with that. And they're like, why? It's like, oh, you'll see.
And look what it did for them.
Exactly.
And look what it did for them.
They knew what they were doing.
Now we worship dogs.
Yeah, we worship the dogs.
Our dogs, I should say, literally live the most plush lifestyle.
Oh my God.
I'm like, oh gosh, you are so lucky. I'm like, you want for nothing.
No, not a worry in the world.
They're like,
I have so going forward, I have a question for the episode ends for y'all. Is there a cryptid that you believe in 100%? Or 90%. I'll say 90%. Is there a cryptid that you're like convinced
Mothman.
it's a real thing? Mothman.
Yes.
Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Bigfoot.
Absolutely. I have no reason to doubt that there is some kind of unknown. I'm going to guess it's an ape.
Sure.
I'm going to guess it's some kind of strangely indigenous.
Like how you said in the last episode with the monkeys getting out.
Yeah.
And
that
there's,
could turn into
there's
Bigfoot
because
real fast.
there's this long belief of a land bridge that was the Bering Strait. So any number of things from Asia, from there was the concept of Pangea, the continents breaking off, and so there could be a primate that we do not know. Sure. Living in the vast wildernesses that we've never really explored,
like Canada.
Yeah, Canada and the Pacific Northwest. It's just amazing to think how many things we don't know about. Because on the Earth, the land takes up very little of it. Mm-hmm. It's mostly water. And let's not even get started on how much of the ocean we don't know.
Seriously. I'm like, have you seen a giant squid? That's a monster.
It is a monster. And like the first time I saw one of those anglerfish, the ones that have the little glow in the dark light. If you try to explain that to me before I had seen it, well, even when I first saw it, I was like, that looks like a nightmare.
That does look like a nightmare.
That looks like Lovecraft sat down and said, I'm going to talk about this thing. It's got big, vacant white eyes with huge, like, glass shards of teeth. It's just a nightmare-looking beast. And now, we're looking at this idea that we know what's out there. We don't know jack. We are still discovering insects. I think we daily discover new, classifications, new breeds of insects. And it's like, there's a lot of life on this planet that we don't understand, we don't know, deep in the rainforests, deep in the, woods, in the jungles of,
Antarctica.
Oh, good God, Antarctica.
Yeah.
Antarctica is terrifying. I knew a guy who was a medic on one of the Antarctic stations, and he swore that they would get countless injuries and deaths coming into the medic bay, and these people would have slashes and cuts and things, and they were and he was told to write it down as exposure. They died because of the cold, and he was like, "No, these are wounds." Like, no, caught outside in the cold.
Sounds like a Yeti to me, which is another cryptid of sorts that we did.
Yeti is like the Bigfoot of the Tibetan Himalayan areas.
Which that's another one that I would say I completely believe in because they have found like Yeti feet and stuff. And it's like highly valuable when you go to Mount Everest. There are people who literally try to scam millions of dollars for this like sacred Yeti Pete. And so,
they even had like the hair, the Yeti hair that Josh Gates had discovered on an expedition, and I think they went and got it DNA tested, and it came back inconclusive, which suggests that it was an animal that they did not know who it was, what it was.
So there you go. So moral of the story is we know nothing. I'm just kidding.
Hashtag we know nothing.
Yes. We have so many things that we have yet to explore in the world and whatnot. So as far as we can talk about is, like the fun thoughts of these creatures and things like that until they are proven. But nonetheless, they make good folklore and good stories. So with that, you want to wrap it up? How about a ghost tip?
Okay, here's a ghost tip. The best policy when facing something that is truly scary is to leave. A lot of people will argue the idea that you should explore, you should find out. If you feel threatened, don't stay. Leave. Follow your instincts. I know too many people who put themselves at great risk and jeopardy just to get a little bit closer to an answer. And honestly, it's not worth it.
There you go. Well, with that, thank you guys again. If you don't already follow us on TikTok, make sure to follow us at The Savannah Underground or on Instagram at The Most Haunted City on Earth. Also, make sure if you want to become a Parajunkie, you check out our Patreon. But with that, though, thank you guys again. And my name is Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Soucy.
And stay spooky, y'all.